We're reading All Things Even Frisky. We're on chapter 13, Billy and Pete Explore. Billy felt wonderful. School was out for 3 whole months. He raced home to celebrate with Frisky. "School's over, Aunt Kate," he shouted as he ran into the house to change his clothes. "No more classrooms, no more books, no more teachers' dirty looks," he sang. Aunt Kate came out of her bedroom all dressed up. "You should be thankful you have a school to go to, Billy," she said, but she smiled as she said it. "Going someplace?" asked Billy, thinking his Aunt Kate was getting prettier every day. "Yes, to a missionary luncheon at church. I made you a sack lunch. Thought you might like to eat outside today." "Oh, boy!" Billy exclaimed. "Frisky and I will go exploring. Okay, Aunt Kate?" "I suppose, but be careful and don't stay away too long." She leaned over and gave Billy a quick kiss on the cheek. "I'll be back around 4 o'clock, I think." Billy changed into his old clothes as quickly as possible, grabbed his sack lunch, and hurried out to untie Frisky. The pup raced around the yard, delighted to be free. Billy ran around the yard with him until he was tired. Panting from the exercise, he threw himself on the ground to rest. Frisky jumped up on him and licked his face. Billy laughed. "Don't you know you're giving me all kinds of germs, Frisky?" he said. "At least, that's what Mrs. Parker says." Frisky only jumped up and licked him some more. Billy gathered the dog into his arms and looked up at the patches of blue sky he could see through the maple trees. He felt close to God as he watched the sunlight dance through the leafy branches. Yes, God had made everything work out with Aunt Kate. "But there's still Mrs. Parker, God," he worried aloud. "Would you please make her move away or something so she won't make trouble for Frisky?" "Hi, Billy," Billy said up quickly. Pete was running across the yard toward him. He flopped down on the grass beside Billy. "Today's the day," he said, picking a blade of grass to chew. "Remember? Or have you changed your mind about going to the deserted house?" Billy shook his head. "Not me, unless you'd rather not." He didn't mention that he'd been hoping Pete would change his mind about going today. "You scared?" Billy shook his head. "Are you?" "Nope, let's go." "I haven't eaten lunch yet," said Billy, stalling for time. "You can eat it on the way. Come on." Billy munched a peanut butter sandwich as he started off for the edge of town with Pete. Frisky scampered and sniffed alongside them, sometimes running off on little side trips of his own. The sun was shining so brightly, and it was such a good feeling to know that school was out for the summer, that Billy forgot to feel afraid. Until the Stony Creek deserted house loomed into view. "There it is, Pete," he said in a thin, scared voice. Pete gave him a quick glance. Billy had to act brave, even if he didn't feel like it. "Come on," he said, leading the way through the underbrush and tall grass around the house. The front door wouldn't open, but the boys crawled through a window that had lost its glass. At first, Billy moved around cautiously, half expecting something to jump out and grab him. But the sun shining through the broken windows, so warm and friendly, made him forget about ghosts. It was such fun to explore the old house. "Hey, come see the saddle," called Pete from a room from behind the kitchen. Billy left the pile of old magazines he was looking through and ran to find Pete. On his way, he spied a stairway. "Hey, Pete, come on upstairs," he yelled. Frisky bounded up the stairs ahead of Billy with Pete trailing behind. The first room they peered into didn't have anything in it but an old broken-down dresser. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling and dust lay thick on the floor. Billy wandered down the hall to the next door. This one was closed. He turned the knob, opened it, and walked in. Billy's mouth dropped open. In one corner of the room was an old bed with some quilts on it. 2 wooden boxes were stacked together to make a table, and another one a chair. Against the wall were stacked cans of food, boxes of crackers, and cigarettes. Billy felt shivers go up and down his spine. Old Sid had been right after all. There was somebody living in the deserted house. Frisky was busily sniffing around the cans of food. Billy grabbed him and ran out of the room. He had to tell Pete about his discovery, and then they had better get out of here. Billy almost bumped into Pete coming down the hall. He grabbed Pete's arm. "I found a hideout," he said in a hoarse whisper, glancing uneasily behind him. "Somebody is living here." He pointed to the room he had just left. Pete stuck his head in the door, took a good look, and then closed the door quickly. He didn't argue with Billy about leaving the deserted house. They ran down the stairs with Frisky at their heels and jumped out of the window through which they had entered. Not until they were a safe distance down the road did they speak. Then it was Billy who broke the silence. "Ghosts don't eat, do they, Pete?" he said. "Or sleep in beds?" Pete looked worried. "I don't know," he said with a shrug. "Maybe I should ask Uncle John," suggested Billy. Pete shook his head. "Don't," he said. "Let's not tell anybody about what we discovered. And someday, let's go back." Billy shivered even though the sunshine felt warm on his back. "Sure," he answered bravely. "Someday." Right now, someday seemed safely far away. Chapter 14, A Strange Man. As Billy had hoped, Dad came home to stay. "You mean you don't have to travel anymore?" asked Billy unbelievingly. "Oh, once in a while, but most of the time I'll be home as I used to be. What do you think of that?" "I think it's great, Dad," answered Billy. "But what about Aunt Kate? Will she leave now?" A frown replaced the smile on Dad's face. "Billy," he said seriously, twitching his nose and twirling his mustache, "I hope that by now you would have grown fond of Aunt Kate, as she has for you. Couldn't you try?" "But I do like her, Dad," Billy almost shouted. "I don't want her to leave. I want you to stay home, but I want Aunt Kate to stay here too, and I was afraid that you couldn't have us both," finished Dad. He was smiling again. "I think it's time we had a good old tussle," he said, grabbing Billy's shoulders. In a moment, they were both on the floor, wrestling and laughing. Frisky was so excited that he jumped all around them, barking so loudly, Aunt Kate came running. She clapped her hands over her ears. "What a commotion! Frisky, stop your barking!" Dad got up from the floor with a sheepish look on his face, brushing off his trousers. Billy stayed on the floor and rolled around with Frisky for a minute. Suddenly, Billy wondered if Aunt Kate might be angry. She hated barking. He glanced up quickly. To his surprise, Aunt Kate and Dad were standing together watching Billy and Frisky. They were both smiling, and Dad had his arm around Kate. Billy stood to his feet and stared. Aunt Kate blushed and pulled away from Dad. "The picnic supper is ready," she said. "When do we go?" "Picnic?" echoed Billy. "Oh boy, can Frisky go?" "If you take his chain along," answered Dad. "You better run over and tell Uncle John we are ready." "Uncle John too? Oh boy!" Billy raced to the house across the yard. Frisky followed at his heels. They were just finishing Aunt Kate's delicious apple pie at the park an hour later when a strange-looking man wandered past their picnic table. Billy looked at him curiously. His trousers were too big and his shirt too small. Brown curly hair stuck out in every direction from under the cap that was pulled down over his eyes. Maybe it was the way he walked that was the strangest of all. So quickly one minute, as if he had important business to tend to, and slowly the next, as if he'd forgotten all about his important business. "I wonder who that man could be," mused Aunt Kate. "He looks strange." Dad laughed. "You had better quit looking at other men, strange or not," he teased. He winked at Uncle John, and Aunt Kate blushed. Puzzled, Billy scratched his head. "Why don't we take Frisky for a little walk?" suggested Uncle John. "Otherwise, we might find ourselves on the cleanup committee." "I'll wash the plates," announced Dad. "You can't wash paper plates," Billy said with a grin. "That's why I volunteered," said Dad, twirling the end of his mustache. Billy had a jumble of thoughts in his head as he started off through the park with Frisky and Uncle John. It was fun having Dad so jolly and Aunt Kate so smiley, but he didn't always understand what they were laughing about. Should he tell Uncle John about what he and Pete had found in the deserted house? No, he'd better not. Pete had told him to keep it a secret. "A penny for your thoughts," remarked Uncle John when they had walked along in silence for a few minutes. Billy gave Uncle John a sidelong glance. "Guess I'm not thinking about much of anything," he answered, feeling uncomfortable. Then, to change the subject, "Uncle John, there's that strange man again." Sure enough, the man that had passed their picnic table was sitting on the grass with his back against a big tree. Frisky growled and strained on his leash. "What's so strange about him?" asked Uncle John. "Well, he's not doing anything, just sitting there," Billy's voice trailed off. "I reckon he's holding up that tree," answered Uncle John with a chuckle. "Besides, he's probably watching the squirrels, or maybe just thinking. Nothing wrong with that, is there?" "No," admitted Billy slowly. But what was there about the man that made him feel uneasy? "Too bad your Aunt Kate is such a good cook," sighed Uncle John, rubbing his stomach. "I ate too much. It all tasted so good after my bachelor meals." "You're a good cook too, Uncle John," insisted Billy loyally. "Remember that time we went camping and you made hobo stew? I wish we could go again." "We will," promised Uncle John. "We will. I think there's some plans in the making right now." "What plans?" pressed Billy. But Uncle John would tell him no more. "Wait and see, Billy," was all he would say. Tune in next time for Chapter 15.